Okay, we've talked about how essential it is to have consequences in place if you want your classroom to run smoothly. We need those boundaries in place. And we've also talked about what we've got to avoid when we're delivering consequences if we don't want things to escalate out of control. Consequences are very effective, but their effectiveness depends on how you apply them. So let's look at a stepped hierarchy of consequences and a way of applying them in the classroom. Right, we said first of all we need a warning. That warning is so crucial because that's the choice point where students get to decide what happens next. As part of your warning, you explain what the consequence will be if they continue with their behaviour. Now once they know exactly what's going to happen, they can then make an informed choice. Do I want to carry on misbehaving and face the consequence, or shall I do as I'm being asked and avoid the consequence? That's when responsibility is passed to them. That's when they have accountability, and that's when we really get students thinking about their behaviour. So the warning is crucial. Now some behaviours don't warrant a warning. We know that things like vandalism and violence and abuse, we would go straight to a consequence immediately. No time for warning there. But here we're talking about kind of low level disruption, talking, that kind of thing, and we must have a warning in place. Now it's important that that warning is very calmly stated. There's no need to lose your temper. There's no need to go ranting and raving at them. That just gives control to them. Don't give them control of your emotions. Let the consequence do the job for you. Just calmly state what's going to happen, and then it's their choice. Do I want to accept the consequence or not? So after a warning, one warning, we don't give another chance and another chance and another chance and another chance. We give one warning and then we move to action every time. And the action might be, these are just examples, you don't have to follow this stepped hierarchy explicitly. That first part of action might be an adjustment in the room. So for example, I might have a desk at the front of the room, and that's where I put students if they can't work with their friends without messing around. They then have to work on their own for a set amount of time. So my warning would be, listen, you're messing around. If that continues, I'm going to have to move you to the front desk. And the action would be, listen, you've carried on talking, so I'm going to move you to the front desk for a few minutes. Away you go. We move to action. Now, we want to keep behaviour in our classroom as much as possible. We don't want to be sending kids out all the time into the corridors. We want to keep it in our classroom as much as possible, and there are various things we can do as part of our hierarchy of consequences to do that. We've actually got some more consequences explained in the report that accompanies this module. But for now, one of the things we could move to on a higher level consequence is an adjustment out of the room. So we might send a student out for time out, or we might send a student out to a colleague's classroom and park them in another classroom. A couple of things on parking students. It's a very effective strategy, a really effective consequence, but it needs to be arranged in advance. If you send Johnny out of your classroom into the next door classroom or a classroom down the corridor and that teacher isn't expecting him, then they might just send him back again, and that's going to cause even more disruption. And Johnny's actually getting a reward then rather than a consequence. So make sure you arrange that in advance. And the second thing is to only send students out into a class of either much older students or much younger students. Because if you send Johnny into a class and it's his same year group or kids more or less his age, he's probably going to see some of his friends in there or kids that he knows. And again, that's quite rewarding for him, showing off that he's been kicked out of his own group. When you're sending students out of class, the thing to remember is that it must be to an area or a place that's less exciting or interesting than your classroom. All the more reason to be having engaging activities happening in the classroom. But if you send a student out for time out, and I've seen this happen so many times, to a corridor, a busy corridor, where there's people walking up and down all the time, that's actually very rewarding for a student. And some of them actually want to be sent on time out because it's really interesting out there and it's really great fun because they mix with lots of different people. So make sure that time out is to a less interesting place. Another adjustment we might try is a loss of time. And I would start with very small increments of time. It might be some time at break time, it might be some time at lunchtime before we move into the higher level of after school time. Now that's one of the most uncomfortable things for students, is to lose some of their personal time. It's a very effective consequence if it's done right. But it's about certainty, not severity. I've mentioned about using your big guns first. If you jump straight in and go to an after-school detention, you've missed out on a load of chances to put in effective consequences before you have to get to the stage of sending letters home to get parental consent for an after-school detention, and then having to give up an hour of your time for after-school detention, and then follow up and chase up the students who don't turn up for after-school detention. It's certainty, not severity. Severe punishments are actually quite difficult to enforce. If you start off with small increments of time, it's a lot easier to make certain that those happen. Students are far more receptive to small amounts of time, and there's a lot you can cover in 5 minutes or 10 minutes with a student in a one-to-one situation. So start with small increments of time so that you've always got a higher level you could move up to. Okay, let's see how that's going to play out. Let's deliver some consequences to Johnny, who's decided that it's far better sitting talking to Brian rather than doing his work. We're going to start by giving him a calm, clear warning and explaining what will happen if his behaviour continues, so that then he can think about it and make a choice on what he wants the outcome to be. So it'd be something like, Johnny, I said no talking. Now listen, you can carry on sitting at the back with Brian if you want to, that's fine. I haven't got a problem with that, but you need to do so without talking. If you carry on talking, you're going to have to move to the front and work on your own on the front desk. Which would you prefer? So I've given Johnny a very clear, calm warning. I haven't lost my temper, there's no need. The consequence is going to do the job for us. And Johnny can now decide, do I stay where I am, carry on talking and face a consequence, or do I avoid the consequence and stay with Brian without talking? Let's just say he decides to ignore you completely and he carries on talking. We then go to our next level. And in this case, it's action. So this time I'm going to say, Johnny, I said no talking, you've ignored me. Pick up your book, move to the front desk, please. You work there for 10 minutes, and if you can manage 10 minutes without turning round, without disrupting anyone else, then I'll let you move back to your own seat next to Brian. And I'm going to start a little timer so that you can see how long you've got left. Away you go. Now that's very fair. I've told him exactly what's going to happen, and I've given him something to work towards. I've just given him 10 minutes. I've started with a small amount of time that he can work towards. And I've also given him a timer so that he can see how he's making progress. He can see how long he's got left. But let's say he decides to ignore us completely again, and he doesn't move. So we then go to the next level. And my next level may be something like, Johnny, I asked you to move to the front desk. Now listen, I'm here working with Paul, and I'm going to be doing so for the next couple of minutes. When I finish with Paul, if you still haven't moved in 2 minutes' time, then you're choosing to spend your break time with me finishing your work. What would you prefer to do? And I'm going to leave that with Johnny. Notice how I said that I'm working with Paul for a couple of minutes, because if I stand over Johnny like this, I said move now, I'm putting him into a corner. He's backed up, and it's highly likely that that situation is going to escalate. So I'm going to give him some think time. I deliver my consequence, I deliver my warning, and I give him some time to think about it before he takes it up. And if he ignores me again, then we move up to the next level. We've always got a higher level that we can go to, and they are fully explained in Confident Classroom Management in the rest of the modules that accompany this video. In fact, we have explained a whole range of consequences for different situations. I know that this particular hierarchy may not be suitable for you. You might not have the luxury of being able to keep students in at break. That's okay. The principle's the same in that you need a stepped hierarchy. You always need somewhere higher to go with your consequences. If you go in with all guns blaring right to the highest punishment that you can think of, you've got nowhere else to go when the behaviour continues. So that's all explained, as is the 3 request technique, which we use for giving very effective warnings to students of consequences that are coming. And that one technique, the 3 request technique, was solely responsible for turning around one of the units I was working in. And we also give things like the 10-minute after school detention, the 2-minute after lesson follow-up, which are both very effective for working one-to-one with students and following up on behaviour. But before we get into the rest of those, let me just give you one sentence that you can say at the end of any consequence to get students to think more about making the right decisions. It goes like this, it's just 10 words. Is that what you want to happen? It's your choice. So when I've delivered my warning to Johnny, if it carries on, you're going to have to be coming in at break and spending 10 minutes working with me. Is that what you want to happen? It's your choice. And then I walk away and I let him think about it. Okay, that's the introduction to consequences.